Mara laughed, scraped my pot roast into the trash, and said, "Nobody eats this garbage, Margaret." The next morning, I handed her an eviction notice for the house she forgot was mine. If you've ever been made to feel invisible in your own home, stay until the very end of this story, because what happened next changed everything. Subscribe to this channel, hit the bell, and drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. I have lived in this house for 41 years. 41 years of cooking in that kitchen, of scrubbing that floor on my hands and knees, of painting those walls twice, and choosing every single piece of furniture that sits in every single room. My late husband Harold and I saved for 3 years before we could afford the down payment. We ate sandwiches for lunch every day for an entire year, just to make that happen. Harold used to joke that we knew the inside of a peanut butter jar better than we knew our own neighbors. And we laughed about it because we were building something. We were building a home. Harold passed 7 years ago. Colon cancer. It was fast, and it was cruel, and it left me with a silence so heavy I thought it might crush me in my sleep. But I had this house. I had these walls that remembered his voice, this kitchen, where he used to sneak spoonfuls of my soup before dinner was even ready. I had his chair by the window. I had his garden in the back, which I still water every single morning because I cannot bring myself to let it die. And then Evan came to me. Evan, my son, my only child. He sat across from me at the kitchen table 3 years ago, and he told me that he and Mara were struggling. The rent on their apartment had gone up again. His job had been inconsistent. The boys Tyler and Braden were getting older and needed more space. He looked at me with those eyes that still sometimes looked like the little boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and call them bouquets, and he said, "Mom, do you think we could stay with you for a while just until we get back on our feet?" I said yes. Of course I said yes. What mother wouldn't? I cleared out the spare room. I bought new sheets for the boys. I rearranged my entire schedule, my entire life to make room for them. I told myself it would be temporary, a few months, maybe 6. I told myself this because I needed to believe it. That was 3 years ago, and somewhere in those 3 years something happened that I still cannot fully explain. Something shifted. It happened so gradually that I almost didn't notice it, like the way water carves a canyon. You don't see it happening. You just wake up one day and everything has changed. The first thing I noticed was the kitchen. Mara started rearranging it. Small things at first. She moved my spice rack to the back cabinet. She put her own cutting board on the counter where mine had always been. She bought a new coffee maker and put mine in the pantry without asking. When I mentioned it, she smiled in that particular way. She had a smile that never quite reached her eyes, and she said, "Oh, Margaret, it just makes more sense this way. You don't mind, do you?" I didn't say anything. I told myself it was a small thing. People need to feel at home. She was trying to make a space for herself. I understood that. But then the dinner started. I had always cooked dinner. Every night, every meal, it was something I loved doing. Harold always said I cooked with my whole heart, not just my hands. I used to make pot roast on Sundays, my mother's recipe, the one she made every Sunday of my childhood, the one that made the entire house smell like warmth and safety. I made it the way she taught me, low and slow, with carrots and potatoes and a bay leaf and a splash of red wine that Harold always pretended not to notice. The first time Mara commented on it, Tyler was 11 and Braden was 9. We were all sitting at the table, or at least I thought we were going to be sitting at the table, and Mara came in from work, looked at the pot roast, and said to Evan, loud enough for me to hear, "Again, it's so heavy. The boys don't really like this kind of food anymore." Evan didn't say anything. He just looked at his plate. Tyler, who was old enough to feel the current in the room, looked up at me with something uncomfortable in his face. Braden was already reaching for his fork. I stood at the stove and I thought, it's just a comment. People make comments. It doesn't mean anything. But it did mean something, because it happened again the next week, and the week after that. Little remarks scattered through meals like broken glass on the floor. Is there a lighter version of this? The boys are really more into pasta now. I read that red meat isn't great for you. Always framed as concern. Always delivered in that pleasant, reasonable voice that made me feel like I was the unreasonable one for feeling stung. I started adjusting my recipes. I made lighter things. I made pasta. I made salads. I made the things I thought she was pointing toward. And for a little while, there was quiet. Not warmth exactly, but quiet. And then the boys stopped coming to the table when I called. This is the part that hurt the most, I think. More than anything Mara ever said to me. Because children are honest. They don't perform indifference. If they're not coming to the table, it's because someone has told them in words or in actions that the table isn't worth coming to. I would call them for dinner, and I would hear Mara's voice from upstairs, soft and even, saying, "Just a minute, boys, we'll be right down." And then they would come down, all three of them, and they would eat whatever Mara had decided to make, something she had apparently started without telling me, and my food would sit on the counter, getting cold, while everyone ate around it. One night, I sat at the table and watched it happen in real time. I had made chicken and dumplings. It had been simmering all afternoon. It was Harold's favorite, and it was mine, and it was the kind of meal that takes patience and love and a willingness to stand at a stove for hours, because you believe the people you're feeding deserve that kind of effort. Mara came in carrying a pizza box. She put it on the counter and opened it and said, "Tyler wanted pizza tonight. Hope that's okay, Margaret." And she said it kindly. That was the thing. She always said it kindly. And Tyler and Braden descended on that pizza like she had just solved a great problem, and Evan opened the refrigerator and got himself a drink and said, "Oh, you made chicken and dumplings." And then he took a slice of pizza. I ate the chicken and dumplings alone. I am not going to pretend that I cried that night. I did. I sat in my bedroom later in Harold's chair, and I cried in the quiet way that old grief teaches you, without sound, without the performance of it. Just the tears doing what they needed to do, and me waiting for them to stop. But here is what I told myself. I told myself that I was overreacting. I told myself that family is complicated, and people are busy, and they don't always mean to make you feel invisible. They're not doing it on purpose. They just have their own lives now, their own rhythms, and I have to find a way to fit into those rhythms instead of expecting everything to bend around mine. I told myself this for 2 more years. 2 more years of eating alone. 2 more years of watching my cooking pushed to the side. 2 more years of conversations that stopped when I entered the room, of inside jokes I was never part of my name becoming something they said with a particular tone, a tone I can only describe as tolerant. Like I was a piece of old furniture they'd agreed to keep because it would be too much trouble to throw it out. I started eating earlier before they came home so I wouldn't have to sit at the table and wait for someone to notice me. I started keeping my bedroom door closed so I wouldn't hear the sound of everyone laughing together in the living room at night. I started taking my walks in the morning instead of the evening so I wouldn't have to pass through the kitchen when Mara was cooking, and feel the particular discomfort of being in your own kitchen and feeling like a guest. I made myself smaller and smaller, and still it wasn't enough. The Sunday 3 weeks before everything changed, I cooked pot roast. I know how it sounds now, but I want you to understand why I did it. I cooked pot roast because it was Harold's birthday. He had been gone for 7 years, and every year on his birthday I cooked his favorite meal. It was something I did for myself as much as anything, a ritual, a way of keeping him present. The house smelled like his birthdays when I was done, and for a few hours I could almost feel him in the room. I didn't announce what I was doing. I just cooked. Mara came home first. She walked into the kitchen, and her face did something I had learned to read by then, a tightening around the eyes, a particular set to her jaw, and she said, "What is that smell?" "Pot roast," I said. "It's Harold's birthday today." She looked at the stove. She looked at me. She said, "I already planned dinner for tonight, Margaret." "I know," I said. "This is separate. For me. You're welcome to have some if you like." She didn't respond to that. She just took out her phone and started texting. And when Evan came home 20 minutes later, she pulled him into the hallway, and I could hear the low murmur of their voices, but not the words. Evan came into the kitchen. He stood by the counter, and he looked at the pot, and he said, "Mom, Mara already had dinner planned for tonight." "I heard her," I said. "This is for me, for Harold's birthday." There was a pause. The kind of pause that means someone is deciding something. "I know you mean well," Evan said, "but it's making the house smell pretty strong, and the boys don't have to eat it," I said. And I kept my voice steady because I had practiced this. I had been practicing this for 3 years, the art of keeping my voice steady when what I wanted to do was fall apart. Evan left the kitchen. Dinner came and went. Mara had made spaghetti, and the boys ate it, and I served myself the pot roast at the small kitchen table in the corner that had become, without anyone officially deciding it, my table. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The next Sunday, I came downstairs to find the pot I had been soaking to clean sitting on the back porch. Mara had moved it outside because she told me later it was taking up counter space. And inside on the kitchen counter was my covered dish, the one I had stored the leftover pot roast in, and the cover was off and it was empty. I stood in the kitchen and I looked at that empty dish and I said, "Where is the leftover pot roast?" Tyler was at the table eating cereal. He shrugged without looking up. "Tyler," I said, "do you know what happened to the food that was in this dish?" He kept looking at his cereal. "Mom said it was old." I walked to the trash can. I lifted the lid. And there, on top of everything else wrapped loosely in a plastic bag, was Harold's birthday pot roast. Still mostly intact, still smelling like his kitchen, like his Sundays, like the thing I had made to keep him close on the one day of the year I needed him most. I stood there holding the lid of the trash can, and I thought, this is it. This is the moment I have been letting happen for 3 years. This is what it looks like when you make yourself smaller and smaller, when you absorb the unkindness and call it keeping the peace, when you convince yourself that invisible is the same as humble. This is where it ends up. I put the lid back on the trash can, and I walked upstairs to my room, and I sat in Harold's chair, and I did not cry. I thought. And what I thought was this. This is my house. Not because I am mean or vindictive or cruel, not because I want to hurt them or punish anyone or make a dramatic gesture for the satisfaction of it, but because this house, these 41 years, this kitchen, this garden, Harold's birthday, my mother's recipe, the pot roast in the garbage, all of it comes back to one single fact that I had somehow allowed all of us to forget. My name is on the deed. It has always been on the deed. Harold put it that way on purpose. He was careful about these things, and when he died, the house came to me fully and completely and without condition. It was mine. It is mine. And somewhere in 3 years of being rearranged and overlooked and tolerated, I had stopped acting like it. I thought about Harold. I thought about what he would say if he could see me eating alone at the small corner table in my own kitchen while my son ate spaghetti with his family 5 feet away. I thought about what he would say if he could see his birthday dinner in a plastic bag in the trash. And I thought about my mother. She used to say something I hadn't thought about in years. She used to say, "Margaret, you can love people and still require them to treat you like a human being. Those two things are not in conflict." I had forgotten that. I had been acting like they were in conflict, like requiring dignity was the same as withdrawing love, like standing up for myself was the same as tearing the family apart. But sitting in Harold's chair on a Sunday morning with the image of that pot roast in the trash burned into my mind, I understood something that should have been obvious years earlier. I hadn't protected the family by becoming invisible. I had only taught them that I didn't matter. And there was only one way to unteach it. I got up from the chair. I went to the filing cabinet in the corner of my room, the one I had always kept locked, the one that Evan had asked about once, and I had simply said contained personal documents. I opened the bottom drawer, and there, in a brown envelope that had not been touched in several years, was everything I needed. The deed to the house, the original mortgage documents paid in full, Harold's will with the clear and simple language he had insisted on leaving the house to me, his wife Margaret Louise Hartley, unconditionally. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I held those papers, and I thought about what came next. Not in anger, not in panic. I thought clearly the way you think when you finally stopped being afraid of a thing and can look at it straight on. I thought about my son, my Evan, the little boy with the dandelions, the man who had sat at my kitchen table 3 years ago with struggling eyes and a genuine need, and who I had opened my home to without a second thought. I thought about how much I still loved him, how that had not changed at all, how it would never change no matter what happened next. And I thought about what love actually looks like, whether it looks like silence and accommodation and a smaller and smaller corner table, or whether it looks like standing up on your own 2 feet and saying clearly and without apology, this is where it stops. I put the papers back in the envelope. I placed the envelope on the nightstand where I could see it. And I went downstairs and made myself breakfast, a full breakfast, eggs and toast and coffee with cream, and I sat at the kitchen table, the real table, the big one, the one that seats 6, the one Harold and I bought at an estate sale in 1987, and refinished ourselves in the garage over 2 weekends, and I ate every single bite. Every single pasta. Mara came downstairs 20 minutes later and looked at me sitting there and said, "Good morning," with that particular note of surprise that told me she had gotten used to not finding me there. "Good morning," I said. And I looked at her steadily, without apologizing for being there, without moving my coffee cup to make more room, without doing any of the small reflexive shrinking I had been doing for 3 years. She looked at me for a moment, and then she went to the coffee maker, and I noticed her hands move slightly differently. A small hesitation I couldn't have named, but could feel. Good, I thought. Good. That feeling was not cruelty. Please hear me when I say that. It was not cruelty. It was something older and quieter and more important than cruelty. It was me, coming back to myself. And the next morning, I made a phone call. The phone call I made that Monday morning was to a lawyer named Patricia Owens. I had used her once before years ago when Harold and I updated our wills after his first health scare. She was sharp and direct, and she never wasted your time with softness when what you actually needed was clarity. I appreciated that about her then. I appreciated it even more now. Her receptionist put me through in less than 2 minutes. "Margaret Hartley," Patricia said. "It's been a while. How are you?" "I've been better," I said. "I need to understand my options. I own my home outright, and I have family members living with me who I need to ask to leave. What does that process look like?" There was a brief pause on her end, not surprise exactly, more like the pause of someone shifting into a different gear. "Are they on the lease?" she asked. "There is no lease," I said. "It was informal, a verbal agreement, 3 years ago." "Any written agreement of any kind, any exchange of money, rent payments, anything documented?" "No," I said, "nothing." "Okay," she said. "Then you're in a relatively straightforward position, Margaret. You'll need to issue a formal notice to vacate. In this state, for a month-to-month occupancy with no written lease, 30 days is standard. We can draft the notice this week if you're ready." I looked at the envelope on my nightstand. "I'm ready," I said. What I did not tell Patricia, what I had not told anyone, was that my hands were shaking while I said it. Because this was real now. This was not me sitting in Harold's chair thinking about what I deserved. This was paperwork and process and 30 days and the face of my son when he read it. This was the end of something, whatever that something was. And even when something has been hurting you for 3 years, the end of it still has weight. It still costs you something. But I kept my voice level, and I made the appointment for Wednesday. I hung up the phone, and I sat very still for a moment, and then I got up and went and watered Harold's garden. Tuesday came and went quietly. I watched things more carefully now that I had made the decision. I noticed details I had been smoothing over for years. At breakfast, Mara reached across me to get the coffee creamer without a word, without an excuse me, without any acknowledgement that I was a person standing in her way. Evan left for work without saying goodbye to me, though I heard him say it to Tyler at the door. Braden, who was 11, now walked through the kitchen, looked directly at me, and said nothing. Not a good morning, not a nod, nothing. I thought, how long has this been happening? How long have I been so accustomed to being passed through that I stopped registering it as unusual? A long time. That was the answer. A very long time. Wednesday morning, I dressed carefully. I wore the blue blouse Harold always said made me look like someone who meant business. I took the brown envelope from the nightstand. I told no one where I was going. Mara was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, and she glanced at me and then at the envelope, and I watched something flicker across her face. "Going somewhere?" she asked. "Errands," I said. And I walked out the front door of my own house without explaining myself to anyone, and the feeling of doing that, of not shrinking into a justification, was so unfamiliar and so electric that I sat in my car for a moment before starting it, just to let myself feel it. Patricia's office was on the second floor of a building downtown, and she was exactly as I remembered her. Silver-haired, efficient reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She shook my hand and sat me down and opened a notepad and said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the 3 years, about the kitchen being rearranged, about eating alone, about the pizza box and the chicken and dumplings going cold, about Harold's birthday, about the pot roast in the trash. When I finished, Patricia looked at me for a moment over the top of her reading glasses. "Margaret," she said, "I want to ask you something and I want you to take your time answering it." "All right," I said. "Are you doing this because you want them gone or because you want to be treated differently?" I thought about that. I actually thought about it, which I think surprised her. "Both," I said finally. "I want to be treated like a human being in my own home. But I no longer believe that issuing an eviction notice and being treated like a human being are two separate things. I think one leads to the other. And if I'm wrong, if they leave and that's the end of it, then at least I'll have my home back. Either way, I'm not losing something I still have." Patricia nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Let's get to work." I left her office an hour later with a draft notice in my purse and an appointment for Friday to sign the final version. I walked to my car and I sat behind the wheel and I felt something I had not felt in 3 years. Not happiness exactly, not relief not yet. Something more like the feeling of a joint being put back into place, a rightness, a return. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home. I bought the ingredients for pot roast. Not Harold's birthday pot roast, just pot roast, my pot roast, because I wanted to cook it in my kitchen on a Tuesday afternoon and I was done asking anyone's permission for that. I came home and put the groceries on the counter and started cooking, and Mara came into the kitchen about 40 minutes later and stopped when she smelled it. "Again with the pot roast," she said. "Yes," I said. I didn't turn around. I kept stirring. There was a silence behind me that had a different quality than usual, a watchfulness. "I thought we talked about this," she said. "We didn't talk about it," I said. "You made comments and I adjusted. That's not the same as a conversation." Another silence. Longer this time. "I'm just saying," Mara said, "that the boys don't—" "Mara," I said, and I turned around and I looked at her directly and I said it calmly. "I am cooking dinner in my kitchen. You're welcome to eat it or not eat it, but I'm going to cook whatever I choose in this kitchen and that's not going to change." She looked at me. I don't know what she expected from me. Apology probably, or at least discomfort. She had gotten a lot of mileage out of my discomfort over the years. What she got instead was me turning back to the stove. She left the kitchen without another word. I heard her on the phone 30 minutes later. She had gone to the back of the house, but I could still hear the sharp, low register of her voice. I didn't try to make out the words. I didn't need to. I knew she was talking to Evan. I knew because 10 minutes later, I heard his car pull into the driveway an hour earlier than usual. He came inside, and he came to the kitchen doorway, and his face was doing several things at once. "Mom," he said. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. I kept my voice warm because I meant it to be warm. I was not at war with my son. That was important to me, that distinction. "Can we talk?" "Of course." He sat down at the kitchen table, and I wiped my hands on a dish towel and sat across from him. And I looked at my son, this 43-year-old man with his father's jaw and his own particular way of running a hand through his hair when he was anxious, and I felt love for him so completely and so painfully that it was almost hard to breathe. But I did not let that feeling move me from where I was sitting. "Mara says you've been acting differently," he said. "Different how?" I asked. He opened his mouth and closed it again. I don't know. Different. She said you had an argument." "We didn't have an argument," I said. "I told her I was going to cook what I chose in my own kitchen." "That's not an argument, that's a statement." Evan was quiet for a moment. "Mom, she's just trying to—" "Evan." I said his name gently, but I said it with intention. "I want to ask you something. When is the last time you asked me how I was doing, not in passing? Not while you were looking at your phone. Actually asked me and waited to hear the answer." He looked at the table. "Because I can tell you when it was," I said. "It was 2 years ago in February when I had that respiratory infection and you brought me soup, which was kind and I appreciated it. But that was the last time." He was quiet. "I have been eating alone in this house for 2 years," I said. "I have watched my cooking get thrown away. I have watched my name get said in a tone that I would not use for someone I disliked, let alone someone I was supposed to love. I have made myself smaller and smaller, trying to keep things smooth, and I'm done with that." Evan looked up. "Mom, I didn't know you felt that way." And this was the moment. This was the exact moment that I had been preparing myself for, because I knew it was coming. Because Evan was not a bad man. He was a distracted man, a conflict-avoidant man, a man who had learned to navigate his household by not noticing things that required a response. And the kindest version of him, the version that was looking at me right now with something real in his eyes, would say he hadn't known. And he would mean it. And 3 years ago, 2 years ago, even 1 year ago, that would have been enough. That would have sent me back to the stove feeling like maybe things would change. Feeling like being seen once was the same as being seen consistently. I was not that woman anymore. "Evan," I said, "whether you knew or not, it happened, and I need things to change, significantly." He nodded. He was leaning forward now, and I could see him wanting this to resolve right here at the table, wanting me to name a specific thing that he could fix so that everything could go back to normal. "What do you need?" he asked. "I need to think about that," I said, "and I need you to know that I'm thinking about it seriously." He accepted that. He helped himself to the pot roast when dinner was ready, and he sat with me at the table, just the two of us, because Mara had taken the boys to get fast food without announcement. I noticed that. I filed it away. We didn't talk much during dinner, but he was there, and it meant something even then, even knowing what was coming. Friday arrived. I went back to Patricia's office, and I signed the notice to vacate. She handed me a sealed envelope with Evan's name on the outside. 30 days from the date of service, she said. "You'll want to hand it to him directly, not leave it somewhere. Or I can have a process server deliver it if you prefer distance." "I'll deliver it myself," I said. "Are you sure?" "I've been sure about this since Tuesday," I said. "I'm past the part where I was unsure." She smiled. It was a small smile, but it was a real one. "Good luck, Margaret," she said. I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat. I kept glancing at it. Not with doubt. With something more like gravity. The understanding that what was inside it was going to change the shape of everything, and that I had chosen this, and that choosing it had been necessary and right, and also at the same time one of the hardest things I had ever done in my 71 years on this earth. They were all home. That was something I had not expected. Typically in the early afternoon, Mara was running errands and the boys were at school and Evan was at work. But Evan's car was in the driveway next to Mara's. The boys' bikes were by the front steps. I walked inside. They were in the living room, all 4 of them. Evan on the couch, Mara beside him, the boys on the floor with a video game. It looked like a family portrait, a normal, happy family portrait. Mara looked up when I came in. Something moved through her face. "We were wondering where you were," she said, and the "we" carried weight. "I had an errand," I said. Evan looked up. He started to say something, and then he saw the envelope in my hand, and he stopped. "What's that?" he asked. I walked to the coffee table in the center of the room, and I placed the envelope directly in the middle of it. I set it down carefully, with intention, the way you set something down when you want it to be unmistakable. "It's for you," I said. "You should read it." Nobody moved for a moment. Then Mara reached forward and picked up the envelope before Evan could. She looked at his name on the front. She looked at me. And then she opened it. I watched her read it. I watched the expression on her face travel through several territories, confusion and then comprehension, and then something that hardened very quickly into something else entirely. She looked up at me. "You're evicting us," she said. Not a question, a statement, flat and disbelieving. Tyler looked up from the video game. Braden paused whatever he was doing. Evan was very still. "Yes," I said. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. And then the ripples started. "Are you serious?" Mara said, and her voice had changed completely now. Gone was the pleasant, reasonable tone that had been her instrument for 3 years. What replaced it was raw and loud, and it filled the room. "Are you actually serious right now?" "I am," I said. "Evan." She turned to him. "Say something." Evan had taken the notice from her hands and was reading it. His face was very pale. "Mom," he said, and his voice was quiet. "You can't mean this." "I do mean it," I said. "Over pot roast," Mara said, and her voice cracked into something incredulous, almost laughing. "You're throwing your family out over pot roast." "No," I said. "I'm asking my family to leave because for 3 years I have been invisible in my own home. The pot roast was the moment I understood that clearly, but it wasn't the cause. The cause was a long time in the making." "We live here," Mara said. "We've been here 3 years. The boys go to school in this neighborhood. Evan's commute is based on this location. I've built my entire—" "And I am sorry for the disruption," I said. "And I meant it. I genuinely am. But this is my house, Mara. It has always been my house, and you have 30 days to make other arrangements." "Evan," Mara said, again sharper this time. Evan set the notice down on the coffee table. He stood up, and I watched my son struggle with something internal. A genuine wrestling. The man he was caught between the mother who raised him and the life he had built around someone else's floor plan. "Mom," he said, "can we please talk about this privately?" "We can talk," I said. "But the notice stands. Talking isn't going to change the notice. That's something you need to understand going in." Mara made a sound I cannot fully describe. Part disbelief, part fury, part something else. She stood up and she looked at me, and for a moment I saw her clearly, more clearly than I ever had before. Not the pleasant, reasonable voice, not the careful management. Just a woman who had miscalculated, who had looked at an older woman in a house and seen something that could be slowly, comfortably overtaken and had been wrong. "After everything we've done for this household," she said. "What have you done for this household?" I asked. The question stopped her. "I'd actually like to know," I said. "Because from where I've been standing, I've provided the home, I've paid the taxes, I've covered the utilities, I've cooked the meals that got thrown away. So I'd genuinely like to know what you feel you've contributed, because maybe I've missed something." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had heard in 3 years. Tyler was staring at me. Braden had set down his game entirely. Evan stood between us with the look of a man who desperately wanted the floor to open. "You have 30 days, I said. "I hope you'll use them to find something comfortable, and I hope sincerely that someday we can find our way back to something better than this. But that starts with the truth. And the truth is that I let this go on too long, and I am the one responsible for fixing it." I walked out of the living room and I went to the kitchen and I put the kettle on for tea. And my hands, when I set the kettle on the burner, were completely steady. I heard Mara's voice start up again behind me, the escalation of it, the way it moved between anger and something more calculated. I heard Evan responding, his voice low. I heard Tyler ask his mother something and Mara say sharply, "Not now." I made my tea. I sat at the big table. I wrapped both hands around the mug, and I looked out the window at Harold's garden, at the green of it, at the stubborn aliveness of things that had been tended carefully. I thought it has started now. Whatever comes next, it has started. And in this house, for the first time in 3 years, I was the one who had started it. The weekend that followed was the quietest war I have ever survived. Nobody screamed, nobody threw things, nobody said anything direct enough to be called a confrontation. Instead, what happened was something more sophisticated and more exhausting than open fighting. What happened was a campaign, and Mara was very good at campaigns. It started Saturday morning. I came downstairs to find Evan sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a look on his face that told me he had not slept well. He looked up when I came in and he said, "Mom, please, can we just talk?" "Good morning, Evan," I said. I poured my coffee. I sat down. "I've been up since 4, he said. "I've been lying there thinking about this and I don't understand. Where did this come from? I thought things were fine." I looked at him over my coffee mug. "You thought things were fine," I said, "because you weren't paying attention to me." He flinched. "Good. not because I wanted to hurt him, but because a flinch means something landed. "That's not fair," he said. "Which part of it isn't true?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know we haven't always been great about including you. I know Mara and I have our own dynamic, and sometimes you probably feel left out. But Mom, eviction. That's a legal document. That's a court proceeding if we don't comply. You're talking about treating your own son like a stranger. I'm talking about requiring my son to be a tenant if he's going to live in my home without treating me like I belong here," I said. "Those aren't the same thing." "You could have just talked to me," he said, and his voice broke a little on the last word, and I felt it. I felt it in my chest because he was still my child, and that sound would never stop meaning something to me. "Evan," I said, and I kept my voice gentle, but I kept it firm. "I have been talking for 3 years in ways that were easier to ignore. This is the version you can't ignore." He put his head in his hands, and I sat with him in the silence, and I did not take it back. Mara appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later. She had that look of someone who had prepared what they were going to say, organized it, rehearsed the key points. "Margaret," she said, "I want to apologize for how I reacted yesterday." I looked at her. "I was shocked," she said, "and I didn't handle it well. But I want to have a real conversation about this because I think there have been some misunderstandings, and I'd like the chance to clear them up." I noticed several things in that short speech. The apology was for her reaction, not for her behavior. The word misunderstandings placed the problem in the space between us, as though we had simply failed to communicate rather than in the specific and consistent pattern of the past 3 years. And the phrase, "I'd like the chance," positioned her as the reasonable one, extending an olive branch. She was good. I had always known she was good. I had just spent 3 years mistaking good for right. "There haven't been misunderstandings, Mara," I said. "You threw away my cooking and laughed about it. Harold's birthday dinner. You said nobody eats this garbage. Those aren't misunderstandings. Those are actions." Something moved through her face, a recalibration. "I shouldn't have said that," she said. "That was unkind and I regret it." "Which time?" I asked. She blinked. "What? Which time do you regret it?" Because it wasn't once. It wasn't an isolated moment. It was a pattern, and I'd like to know which specific instance you're apologizing for, because that will tell me whether this apology covers the full territory or just the piece you think I'm most upset about. The silence in the kitchen had a texture to it. Evan looked between us. Mara said carefully, "I hear that you've been hurting for a long time." "That's not an answer," I said. She took a breath. "Margaret, I think you and I have had a difficult dynamic since the beginning. I think we both could have done things differently. I'm willing to take responsibility for my part in that." "Your part," I said. "Yes." "What is your part?" I asked, specifically. And there it was. The thing she could not do, because doing it would require her to actually look at the catalog of small cruelties, to name them, to stand next to them, without the buffer of vagueness. And she could not do that. I could see her processing, trying to find a way to take responsibility without actually being responsible and coming up empty. "I think I made you feel like a guest in your own home," she said finally. I felt a strange thing happen in my chest when she said that. Not softening exactly, but recognition. Because it was true, and it was the most honest thing she had said, and some part of me acknowledged that. "Yes," I said. "You did." "And I'm sorry for that," she said. "I believe you," I said. "And the notice still stands." Evan made a sound. Mara's expression shifted from apologetic to something more controlled. "So the apology doesn't matter," she said. "The apology matters," I said. "But the house is mine, and I've decided what I need to happen in my house, and that decision isn't contingent on whether you apologize or not. It's not a punishment, and it's not a negotiation. It's a boundary. Those are different things." Mara looked at me for a long moment. Then she said in a voice that was very quiet and very precise, "You're really going to do this?" "Yes," I said. "I am." She left the kitchen. A moment later, I heard the bedroom door close upstairs. Not slammed. Closed deliberately, which was somehow worse. Evan looked at me with something in his eyes that I recognized as the expression of a man who is being asked to choose between two things he doesn't want to lose, and who is not yet sure which loss he can survive. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "I want you to be my son," I said. "Just be my son." However, this turns out. Whatever happens with the 30 days, I need you to understand that you are my child, and I love you, and none of this changes that. But I cannot go back to being invisible to accommodate your comfort. I just can't. He nodded slowly. Then he got up and poured the rest of his coffee down the sink and said, "I need some air." And he walked out the back door. I watched him go. And then I did something I had not done in years. I went to the phone and I called my friend Dorothy. Dorothy Marsh had been my closest friend for 32 years. We met in a church choir and discovered we both hated singing but loved the fellowship, and we had been inseparable in the way that women of a certain age who have survived certain things become inseparable. She had been widowed herself 3 years before Harold died, and she understood without explanation the particular landscape of being an older woman alone in a world that has very little patience for that. I had not told Dorothy anything about the past 3 years. Not really. I had mentioned things in passing small complaints that I minimized as I voiced them, and she had listened with the careful attention of someone who suspects they are only getting part of the story, but respects you enough not to push. She had asked more than once if I was all right. I had said yes. I was done saying yes to things that weren't true. She picked up on the second ring. "Margaret," she said, and just the warmth in her voice when she said my name made my throat tighten. "Dorothy," I said, "I have something to tell you. It's going to take a while." "I'll put the kettle on my end," she said. I told her everything. I told her in the same order I had told Patricia, but with less precision and more feeling because Dorothy did not require me to organize it into a legal framework. She required only that I tell the truth. I told her about the kitchen being rearranged, about eating alone, about the pot roast, about Harold's birthday, about signing the notice, about the conversation this morning in the kitchen. When I finished, there was a pause, and then Dorothy said, "Margaret Louise Hartley, you should have called me 2.5 years ago." I laughed. It surprised me. I had not laughed at anything in what felt like a very long time. "I know," I said. "How are you actually feeling?" she asked. "Terrified," I said, "and more like myself than I have in years, both at the same time." "That's exactly right," she said. "That's what doing the right hard thing feels like." I held the phone and I breathed, and I let my friend's voice be the thing it had always been. A reminder that I existed, that someone in the world knew who I was and was glad of it. "Come for dinner Thursday," she said. "I'll make your mother's pot roast recipe, and we'll eat the whole thing ourselves and not apologize to a single soul." I said yes. The week moved forward in the way that weeks move when everything inside them is charged with pending consequence. The house was civil, too civil. The kind of civil that is really just tension wearing a costume. Mara said good morning. Evan was home for dinner every night. The boys were quieter than usual in the way that children become quiet when they can sense that the adults around them are holding something fragile. Tuesday evening, Tyler came and found me in my room. He knocked on the open door, which he had never done before. In 3 years, he had never knocked on my door. He had always just passed my room without acknowledgement the way you pass furniture. "Grandma Margaret," he said. I looked up from my book. Tyler. He stood in the doorway. He was 13 now, tall in the awkward way of boys that age, all limbs and uncertainty. He looked so much like Evan at that age that it caught me every time. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Of course," I said. I set my book down. He came in and sat on the edge of the chair across from me, the one by the window, and he looked at the floor for a moment, and then he looked at me and he said, "Are you really making us leave?" "Your parents need to find a new home, yes," I said carefully. "That's true." "Because of the pot roast?" he asked. I thought about the best way to answer a 13-year-old's honest question. "Because of a lot of things that added up over a long time," I said. "The pot roast was just the last one." He was quiet. Then he said, "I ate some of the pot roast, The week before. The leftover one from the container. I ate it in the middle of the night because I was hungry and it was good. I felt something move through me that I cannot fully name. Something warm and painful and grateful all at once. I'm glad you liked it, I said. I didn't know, he said, about it being Grandpa Harold's birthday. My mom didn't tell me that when she threw it away. I looked at my grandson. At this boy I had watched grow up in my house, who had walked past me 1,000 times without seeing me, who had come to my door and knocked and sat in the chair and told me this thing. And I thought about what children absorb from the adults around them, how they learn to see or not see, how none of what Tyler had become in this house was entirely his own invention. Tyler, I said, I want you to know that whatever happens, you are my grandson. That is permanent. That doesn't have an eviction notice. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, Dad cried last night. I heard him. I held that information very carefully. Your dad loves me, I said. And I love him. That's part of why this is hard. He nodded. He stood up. And then he did something that undid me completely. He crossed the room and he hugged me, quickly, almost roughly, the way teenage boys hug when they are feeling more than they know how to carry. And then he left. I sat in that room for a long time after he left, and then something happened that I had not anticipated that shifted the entire weight of the week. Thursday morning, 2 days before I had dinner with Dorothy, Evan came to me alone. Not in the morning when Mara was in the kitchen, not in the evening when the boys were around. He came at 11 in the morning when the house was empty, when Mara had taken the boys to their appointments, and he had clearly stayed home from work with intention. He sat at the kitchen table. He had a piece of paper in front of him. He looked like a man who had been doing something difficult and had done it until it was done. Mom, he said, I need to tell you something. All right, I said. I've been talking to a therapist, he said. I started going about a week ago, right after the notice. I did not say anything. I let him continue. She asked me to do something for this session, he said. She asked me to write down 3 specific times I had let you down. Not Mara, me. Things I personally did or didn't do. He looked at the paper. I want to read them to you. My throat tightened. The first one, he said, was 2 years ago at Thanksgiving. You made the cranberry sauce from scratch the way you always do, and Mara brought the store-bought kind. And when Tyler asked which to use, I said try the store-bought. And you were standing right there. And I didn't look at you. I remembered that. I had not known he did. The second one was about 8 months ago. You mentioned that the light bulb in your closet had been out for a week. You mentioned it twice. And I never changed it. And I could see you struggling to get dressed in the dark, and I still didn't change it. He stopped, swallowed. I didn't change it for 6 weeks, until you changed it yourself. The light bulb, such a small thing, such a completely ordinary small thing. The third one, he said, and his voice was unsteady now, was Harold's birthday. I knew what day it was. I knew why you were cooking. And when Mara started with the dinner was already planned thing, I didn't say anything. I should have said it's my father's birthday and my mother is cooking his meal, and we will eat it with her. I should have said that. I didn't. He folded the paper. He looked at me. I am so sorry, Mom, he said. Not for what Mara did, for what I did, for what I allowed. I will not pretend that this did not break something open in me. It did, because I had been prepared for the campaign for the apology that wasn't an apology for the negotiations for the pressure. I had not been fully prepared for this, for my son sitting at my kitchen table with a piece of paper and the specific details of his own failures refusing the comfort of vagueness. I reached across the table and I took his hand. I hear you, I said. Does it change anything? He asked. And he was not asking about the notice. He was asking about something larger, whether there was still a pathway back to each other, whether he had waited too long to walk it. It changes everything that matters, I said, and it doesn't change the notice. Both of those things are true at the same time. He nodded. He squeezed my hand. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to change the notice. I'm asking you if my mother still knows her son loves her. I could not speak for a moment. Yes, I finally said. I know that. We sat there together in my kitchen for a while, not talking, just sitting, and it was the most like family we had been in 3 years. Not because the problem was solved, not because anything was fixed, but because we were finally in the same room, looking at the same thing, without pretending it wasn't there. What I didn't know was that while Evan and I sat in that kitchen holding hands over a kitchen table, Mara was doing something I would not find out about until 2 days later. Something that would change the shape of the next 3 weeks completely. Something that made every negotiation, every apology, every careful conversation feel like exactly what it had been, a distraction while she played an entirely different game. I found out on Saturday morning when my doorbell rang, and I opened the door to find a man I had never seen before standing on my front porch with a business card and a very specific kind of smile. "Mrs. Hartley," he said, "my name is Dennis Corwell. I'm an attorney. I've been retained by Mara Hartley. I'd like to talk to you about an adverse possession claim on this property." I stood at my own front door and felt the ground shift under my feet, and then I took a very slow breath. And I said, "You'd better come in." Dennis Corwell had the kind of face that had learned to stay neutral for professional reasons. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where Evan had held my hand 2 days earlier, and he set his briefcase on the floor and folded his hands and spoke in the measured, even tone of someone who had delivered uncomfortable information many times before and had gotten efficient at it. Adverse possession, he said, is a legal doctrine that allows a person who has occupied a property openly, continuously, and without the owner's objection for a statutory period to make a claim on that property. In this state, that period is 10 years. However, there are circumstances under which a court may consider partial claims or equity arguments based on significant contribution to the property. I looked at him. "My family has been here 3 years," I said, "not 10. "That's correct," he said. "A full adverse possession claim would not succeed on those grounds. However, my client is prepared to argue a theory of equitable interest based on significant improvements made to the property during their occupancy, combined with an implied agreement that the arrangement was permanent in nature." I kept my face very still. "What improvements?" I asked. He opened his briefcase and took out a document, a list. He slid it across the table, and I looked at it, and I felt something cold move through me. Not because the list was convincing, but because someone had sat down and written it. Someone had spent time building this. The list claimed that Mara had repainted 2 rooms, that she had replaced a bathroom faucet, that she had installed new cabinet hardware in the kitchen, that she had contributed to landscaping, that the cumulative value of these improvements represented a significant financial stake in the property. I looked up from the list. "She repainted Tyler's room because Tyler wanted blue walls," I said. "She replaced the bathroom faucet herself after she broke the old one. The cabinet hardware she installed without asking me, and I didn't like it. And the landscaping she's referring to is 3 potted plants she put on the porch." Dennis Corwell's neutral face did not change. "These details would certainly be relevant in any proceeding," he said. "Is there going to be a proceeding?" I asked. "That depends on you, Mrs. Hartley," he said. "My client is not looking for conflict. She would like to explore whether a resolution is possible that allows the current living arrangement to continue under a more formalized structure, a long-term lease agreement, perhaps with defined terms." I sat back in my chair. I looked at this man in my kitchen, and I thought very carefully before I spoke. "Let me make sure I understand," I said. "Your client, who is my daughter-in-law, hired you to come to my home and suggest that if I don't allow her to continue living here on her terms, she will pursue a legal claim on my property. Is that the message? My client would characterize it as seeking equitable recognition of her investment in this home," he said. "Her investment," I repeated. "Yes." I stood up. Not quickly, not dramatically. I stood up with full intention, and I looked at Dennis Corwell and I said, "I want you to leave my house now." He blinked, just slightly. "Mrs. Hartley, I understand this is a difficult—" "I have my own attorney," I said. "Her name is Patricia Owens, and she will be receiving a call from me within the hour. If your client has anything further to communicate to me, she can do it through Patricia. Now please leave." He gathered his briefcase. He stood, He took a card from his jacket pocket and set it on the table, and I did not touch it, and he walked to the front door and let himself out. I stood in my kitchen, and I listened to his car start and pull away, and then I picked up the phone and called Patricia. She answered on the third ring. "Patricia," I said, "Mara hired a lawyer. He was just at my house. He said the words adverse possession and equitable interest, and then I threw him out." There was a pause. Then Patricia said in a tone that was somehow both calm and sharp at the same time, "Say that again." I said it again. I told her everything, the list, the improvements, the implied permanent arrangement, all of it. When I finished, Patricia was quiet for 4 full seconds. I counted. "Margaret," she said, "this claim has no merit. I want to be direct with you about that. Adverse possession requires 10 years of continuous hostile occupation without the owner's permission. They have been there 3 years with your permission, which eliminates the hostile element entirely. The equitable interest argument based on those improvements is weak at best and laughable at worst. No competent judge would entertain it." "But could she file it?" I asked. "Even knowing it won't succeed, could she file it and delay everything?" Another pause. "She could file something," Patricia said. "It would cost her money, and it would cost her time, and it would cost her credibility. It would not cost her the house. But yes, a bad faith filing could complicate and delay." "How long?" I asked. "Months, potentially, if she files and it goes to a hearing before dismissal." I thought about that. I thought about living in this house for months more with Mara running a legal strategy from the guest bedroom. I thought about what that would do to Evan, what it would do to the boys, what it would do to me. "What are my options?" I asked. "I counterfile immediately," Patricia said. "I document everything. I establish the clear ownership history, the absence of any lease agreement, the lack of any genuine improvements of value. I make the filing so airtight that her attorney, if he has any sense, will advise her to drop it before it goes anywhere. I also want to send a letter to her attorney today making clear that we are aware of the nature and weakness of the claim and that any bad faith filing will be met with a motion for sanctions." "Do it," I said. "Margaret," Patricia said, and her voice shifted slightly. "How are you holding up?" I looked at Harold's chair by the window. I thought about the woman who had sat in it 2 weeks ago with shaking hands and an envelope of documents trying to find the courage to begin. "I'm angry," I said, "genuinely angry, which is something I haven't let myself be in a long time. But I'm all right. I'm more all right than I've been in 3 years." "Good," she said. "Hold on to that." I held on to it. I called Patricia back, confirmed the counterfiling, and then I sat at the table and I thought about Evan, because Evan did not know about this. He could not have known. The man who had sat across from me 2 days ago with his list of 3 failures and tears in his voice had not known his wife was simultaneously hiring a lawyer to threaten my house. Either he didn't know, or he was a far better performer than I had ever given him credit for. I needed to know which. I called his cell phone. He picked up in 2 rings. "Mom," he said, "are you at work?" "Yes, what's wrong?" "I need you to come home," I said. "Not right now if you can't, but today. And I need to talk to you alone." A pause. "What happened?" "Your wife hired a lawyer," I said. "He was at my front door this morning." The silence on his end was total. And in that silence, I heard something I recognized the specific quality of a person encountering information that has genuinely blindsided them. It is different from the silence of someone caught. It does not have the same density. "She what?" he said, flat, not a question. "Adverse possession claim," I said, "or the threat of one. My attorney is already responding." "Mom." His voice had changed completely. "I did not know about this. I want you to know that." "Come home at lunch," I said. "We'll talk then." He was at the door by 12:15. His face when he walked in told me everything I needed to know. He was not pale with guilt. He was pale with the particular shade of someone who has just had the floor pulled out from under them by a person they sleep next to. I made us sandwiches because my hands needed something to do, and because some part of me, the mother part that never fully switches off, knew he probably hadn't eaten. He sat at the table and he said, "I confronted her this morning. I called her from the parking lot. She said she was protecting the family." "By threatening to take my house," I said. "She said it wasn't a threat. She said it was a negotiating position." He shook his head, and I could see the complexity of his feelings, the love for her, and the anger at her, and the shame that lives in the specific space of realizing someone you chose has done something genuinely indefensible. "Evan," I said, "I'm not asking you to choose sides." "I know," he said, "but she chose one. She chose without telling me. She went behind your back and behind my back, and she sat across from you in this kitchen and apologized to your face while she was already talking to a lawyer." I let that sit. "The apology was on Thursday," I said. "He was at my door on Saturday. She moved fast." Evan put his sandwich down. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said. And this apology was different from the one at the table with the piece of paper, different even from Thursday's raw accountings. This one was saturated with a specific humiliation that only comes from being made complicit in something without your consent. "What are you going to do?" I asked. He looked at me. "I'm going to tell her to drop it," he said. "Today. Whatever it costs, whatever fight it starts, I'm going to tell her to call her lawyer and drop it." "And if she won't?" I asked, because I needed to know. Because I needed to know what my son was made of when it was not comfortable to show me. He held my gaze. "Then I'll tell her that if she pursues this, she'll be pursuing it without me standing next to her." I believed him. I believed him not because it was the answer I wanted, but because of the way he said it. Quietly, without drama. The way you say a thing when you have already fully thought it through. He left to go back to work, and I heard him on the phone in the driveway, his voice low and controlled, and I did not go to the window to watch. Some things are between a husband and wife, and even when the marriage is troubled and the wife has just threatened your mother's home, the argument still belongs to them. What I did do was go upstairs. I knocked on the door to the room that had once been my spare room and was now Mara and Evan's room. She was in there. I could hear her. I knocked and I waited. She opened the door. She had been crying or was about to. Her eyes had that particular redness. "Evan called you," I said. "Yes," she said. "Can I come in?" I asked. She stepped back. I came into the room and I stood there, and I looked at this woman who had rearranged my kitchen and thrown away my cooking and hired a lawyer to threaten my house, and I tried to find something that was not anger and not contempt and not the cold efficiency that had gotten me through the morning. What I found underneath all of it was something closer to grief. "Why?" I asked, not an accusation, genuinely. "You had the conversation with me. You said you understood. And then you picked up the phone and called a lawyer. Why?" Mara sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at her hands. "Because I was scared," she said. "Of what?" "Of starting over," she said. "The boys are settled in their schools. Evan's commute works. We've been here 3 years, and I know this house, and I know this neighborhood, and I know where everything is, and the thought of packing everything up and starting from nothing again—" She stopped. "I panicked," she said. "I know that doesn't make it right. I know what I did was wrong. I know it." I looked at her. "You panicked," I said, "and your instinct when you panic is to attack." She didn't answer that, but she didn't deny it either. "Mara," I said, "I'm going to ask you something, and I want a real answer, not a managed answer, a real one. Do you understand what these 3 years have been like for me?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I think I understood it more than I admitted. I think I told myself a story where you were just set in your ways and resistant to change, and it was easier to believe that than to believe I was unkind. But when I sat down with Dennis yesterday, and I had to explain it from the beginning, I heard myself, and I didn't—" She stopped again. "I didn't like what I heard." This was different. This was not Thursday's rehearsed apology. This had cost her something. "Call him off," I said. "Today. No conditions. No counteroffers." "I already did," she said, "when Evan called." I nodded. I turned to leave, and then I stopped in the doorway because there was one more thing. "Mara," I said, "I need you to understand that calling off the lawyer doesn't change the notice. I want to be clear about that. I know that's hard to hear right now, but I need you to understand it, She looked up. Her eyes were wet. "I know," she said. I went back downstairs. I called Patricia and told her Mara had withdrawn the attorney. Patricia said she would confirm directly with Dennis Corwell's office and that she would hold the counterfiling in reserve but would not submit it unless something further developed. I put the phone down and I went to the kitchen and I stood at the counter for a moment without doing anything, just standing, just being in my kitchen with the afternoon coming through the window and Harold's garden visible outside and my name on the deed in a filing cabinet upstairs. What I felt was not triumph. I want to be precise about that, because triumph would have required me to feel like I had beaten someone, and I did not feel that. What I felt was exhaustion. The kind that comes after sustained alertness, after weeks of being braced, after navigating a campaign with tools and countermoves and attorneys and apologies that turned out to be something else. I was tired in a way that went below the physical. And then the phone rang. I almost didn't answer it, but I did. It was Dorothy. "I heard your voice in my head all morning," she said. "Don't ask me to explain it. I just felt like something was happening. Are you all right?" I leaned against the counter and I told her, all of it. The lawyer at the door, the list of improvements, the call to Patricia, the conversation with Evan, and finally Mara on the edge of the bed saying she didn't like what she heard. Dorothy was quiet when I finished. Then she said, "Margaret, do you remember what you told me about Harold when he was sick? At the very end, I thought, I said he wasn't afraid. I said he faced it without pretending it was something other than what it was." "You said he looked it straight in the eye," Dorothy said. "That's what you've been doing, all of this. You looked it straight in the eye and you didn't flinch. Harold would be so proud of you." I pressed my hand flat against the counter and I breathed. "I'm not done yet," I said. "I know," she said, "but you're going to be okay. I can hear it." The next 2 weeks moved differently than the first one had. The campaign had ended, or at least it had changed into something quieter. Mara was subdued in a way I had not seen before, not the pleasant management she had used for 3 years, but something more like genuine chastening. She cooked dinner some nights and left portions for me without comment. She did not rearrange anything in the kitchen. She said good morning and she meant it, or at least she tried to. And the boys. The boys began to emerge in a way I had almost stopped expecting. Braden started asking me things, small things at first. How to make grilled cheese without burning it. What the old television shows I sometimes mentioned were about. Whether it was true that Grandpa Harold had been in the army. That last one opened something between us that I had not anticipated. I told him about Harold's service, the stories Harold used to tell, the particular way he described things with economy and precision because he had been trained to say what was necessary and nothing extra. And Braden listened with the full-faced attention of a child encountering a whole world that predates them. Tyler continued to find reasons to knock on my door. It was never anything large. Sometimes it was homework. Sometimes it was just that he sat in the chair and we watched the same television program in companionable quiet. But he kept coming back, and each time he came, I understood a little more clearly what I would have lost if I had kept making myself smaller. Not just my own dignity, these boys, this chance. The 25th day arrived, 5 days before the end of the 30-day notice. Evan came to me in the evening. He sat at the kitchen table with the look of a man who has done a hard thing and has the receipts to prove it. "We found a place," he said. "It's a rental, 3 bedrooms, good school district. We can be out by the 30th. I sat down. "How does it feel?" I asked. "Terrible," he said, "and necessary, both." He looked at me. "I've been thinking about what you said, about requiring people to treat you like a human being. I've been thinking about whether I've been requiring that for myself either, whether I've been settling for things I shouldn't have been settling for." He paused. "My therapist says I have a lot to unpack." "You do," I said. "So do I. We're not so different in that way." He smiled, small and tired and real. "No," he said. "We're not." I looked at my son, and I thought about every version of him I had ever known. The boy with the dandelions, The teenager who called me from college when he was homesick, even though he would have died before admitting it was homesickness. The man who came to me 3 years ago with struggling eyes and an honest need. And now this man across from me who had spent 3 years looking away and was looking back finally, even though it was hard to do. "I want to have dinner with you before you go," I said. "All of you. One dinner at this table, all 6 of us. I'll cook." He looked at me. "What will you make?" "Pot roast," I said. He laughed. It was unexpected and full, and it filled the kitchen in a way that reminded me of Harold so sharply I had to breathe through it. "Of course you will," he said. "Of course I will," I said. What none of us knew sitting in that kitchen with 5 days left on the clock and the tentative warmth of something almost like repair was that the last 5 days would not go the way any of us expected. That something was coming that would not break us apart further, but would instead crack open the story in a direction none of us had been looking. It would start with a box I had not opened in 7 years, found in the back of the closet during my cleaning the day before the moving truck was scheduled to arrive. A box with Harold's handwriting on the front. And inside it, something that changed what I understood about why Harold had left the house to me the way he had, unconditionally and without caveat, and why he had never once explained his reasoning to our son. The box was not large. That was the first thing I noticed. It was a shoebox, actually the kind that dress shoes come in, brown and unremarkable, with Harold's handwriting on the top in black marker. It said simply, "Margaret, for when you need it." I had not seen this box in 7 years. I had not seen it because I had not cleaned out the back of the closet in 7 years, because the back of that closet was Harold's side, the left side, and I had been leaving it exactly as he left it, because some losses you manage by not disturbing the evidence of them. I found it the morning of the 29th day, one day before the moving truck was scheduled to arrive. I had been clearing space, making room, doing the practical things you do when a chapter of your life is ending, and another is beginning. And my hand found the box on the high shelf behind his old winter coat, and I read my own name in his handwriting, and I sat down on the floor of the closet and held it in my lap for a full 5 minutes before I could open it. Inside was a letter. Several pages folded in thirds in Harold's careful print, the kind of print he used when he was writing something important, when he didn't want his meaning to be misread. There was also a smaller envelope sealed with Evan's name on it. I picked up Harold's letter first. "Margaret," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I was right about something I hoped I was wrong about. It means you needed the house more than I thought you would. And it means you were strong enough to do what needed to be done, which I never doubted, but which I knew would take you longer than it should have, because you always loved more than you protected yourself. And that was both your greatest gift and the thing that worried me most. I have to tell you something I never told you when I was alive, because I didn't want it to color how you saw things. I didn't want to plant a seed of suspicion that you might water with your worry. But I'm telling you now because you need to know why I did what I did with the house. I knew Margaret. I knew about Mara in a way I never spoke out loud. I put the letter down on my knee and I breathed. Then I picked it up again. He had seen it, Harold had. 2 years before he got sick, he had seen what I had spent 3 years trying not to name. He wrote about a specific afternoon, a Sunday, when Evan and Mara had come for dinner, and Harold had been in the kitchen for a glass of water, and overheard Mara on the back porch on her phone. He wrote down what she said. He had memorized it because Harold was precise that way, because he believed in knowing exactly what you had heard before you decided what it meant. She had been talking to her sister. She had said word for word as Harold recorded it. The house is his mother's, but Harold's not well, and Evan is the only child. It'll work itself out eventually. We just have to be patient. I sat on the floor of the closet, and I read that sentence 3 times. It'll work itself out eventually. We just have to be patient. She had known about Harold's illness before we told the family, or she had suspected it, and her response to that suspicion had been to begin calculating. Harold wrote, "I didn't tell you because I wasn't certain enough, and because I didn't want to cause a rift that might have been unnecessary. But I made sure the house was yours without condition, and I made sure the language in the will was airtight, and I made sure that if the day ever came when you needed to stand on that foundation alone, it would hold. I built it to hold, Margaret. I built it for you." I was crying by then. Not the quiet kind from years of grief practice. The full kind. The kind that comes when someone who loved you proves it from beyond the place where love usually reaches. He ended the letter like this: "You were the best thing in my life. The house is yours because you earned every board and nail of it. Don't let anyone take it from you, not even our son who I love, but who sometimes needs to be required to be better. He'll rise to it if you require it. He always did." I sat on that floor for a long time. Then I picked up the envelope with Evan's name on it. I looked at it. I turned it over. It was sealed, and it had been sealed for years, and it was not mine to open. Harold had written Evan's name on it because it was meant for Evan. Whatever was inside it was between a father and a son. I stood up. I went to the kitchen. I called Evan. "I need you to come over," I said. "Before the truck gets here tomorrow. I need you to come now." He heard something in my voice. "I'm leaving right now," he said. He was at the door in 20 minutes. He came in, and I was sitting at the kitchen table, and the shoebox was in front of me, and his father's letter was folded next to it. I watched Evan see the box. I watched him read the writing on the lid, the handwriting he had grown up reading on birthday cards and grocery lists and notes left on the refrigerator. Something crossed his face that was very young and very old at the same time. He sat down slowly. "This was in the closet," I said. "Harold sighed. He left it for me." Evan looked at the box without touching it. "What's in it?" "A letter to me," I said, "and one to you." I slid his envelope across the table. He looked at it. He looked at his name in his father's handwriting. And then he picked it up, and he held it with both hands the way you hold something you're not sure you're ready to receive. "Do you want to read it privately?" I asked. "No," he said. "No, I want to read it here." He opened it carefully. He unfolded the pages inside. I watched his eyes move across his father's words, and I watched his face change the way a landscape changes when the weather moves through it. Surprise first, then comprehension, then something harder and more complicated. He read for a long time. Harold had apparently written him more than he had written me. When Evan finally set the pages down, his hands were not steady. "He knew," Evan said. "Yes," I said. "About Mara." He said it flatly, not a question. "Yes." Evan sat back. He pressed both hands over his face, and he stayed like that for a moment, and then he brought his hands down, and he looked at the ceiling, and he said very quietly, "Did you know, before the box?" "No." I said, "I suspected something for a long time, but I didn't know, not like Harold knew." Evan was quiet for a long time. I let him be quiet. I understood that he was processing something seismic, the specific kind of shift that happens when you realize the person you built a life with entered that life with a set of intentions that were not fully transparent, and that someone who loved you saw it and chose to protect you quietly rather than blow the whole thing apart. "What did he write to you?" Evan asked finally. I told him. Not the exact words, because some of it was private in the way that a husband writing to his wife is private, but the substance of it, the reasoning behind the house, the sentence Harold had overheard, the intention behind the airtight will. Evan looked at the table. "She said it herself," he said, 2 nights ago. When I asked her directly whether she had married me, knowing that eventually the house would come to us, she said, he stopped. He started again. She said she had always assumed we would end up with the house eventually, that it was only practical to think about it. I looked at my son. "Evan," I said carefully, "I am not going to tell you what to do with your marriage. That is yours. But I am going to tell you what your father wrote to me about you. He said you always rise to being required to be better. He said you needed to be required. And he said he loved you completely." Evan pressed his lips together. His eyes were wet. "He never told me that directly," he said, "about rising to things." "No," I said. "Harold showed love by building things that would last. He wasn't always good at saying it out loud." I paused. He was better at writing it down when he couldn't say it in person anymore. Evan reached across the table and he touched the shoebox, just rested his hand on it for a moment, like touching a shoulder. "I'm going to therapy twice a week now," he said. "Did I tell you that No, I said. I started after the lawyer thing, after I realized how much I had been not noticing, because not noticing was easier than dealing with what I'd see. He shook his head. Dad saw it. He saw it years ago, and he didn't say anything to me directly either. He protected you, I said. Both of you did the same thing. You protected each other from a truth that would have been painful. The difference is, Harold also protected me. Evan looked at me. I didn't protect you, he said. I know that. You're protecting me now, I said. That counts. He stayed for 2 hours. We sat together and we talked, really talked the way we hadn't in years, the way grief and busyness and the drift of adult life had made hard. He told me things I hadn't known. About his marriage the early years, the times he had felt something was off and chosen not to examine it because examining it would have required action, and action was frightening. About the loneliness of being in a house with someone and still feeling alone. I listened without offering solutions because he wasn't asking for solutions. He was asking to be heard by his mother, and I could give him that without reservation. Before he left, he stood at the front door and he said, "The truck comes at 8 tomorrow morning. We'll be out by noon." "I know," I said. "Mom," he said, and he stopped. He looked at me with Harold's eyes in his face, that particular shade of gray-green that I had loved for 45 years in 2 different people. "I'm not losing you. That's not what this is. I need you to know that." "It's not what this is," I agreed. "This is a reset. Those are different from endings." He hugged me at the door. Long and full, the way Evan had hugged me when he was small and unself-conscious about it, before adolescence made him careful with his affection. I held on to my son, and I thought, there he is. There is the person I raised, still in there underneath everything life had put on top of him. He pulled back. He looked at me once more, and he left. That night I cooked the dinner I had promised. Pot roast low and slow, the whole house filling with the smell of it, the way it always had. I set the table for 6, the big table every seat. I put out the good plates, the ones Harold and I had gotten as a wedding gift that I only used for occasions. I lit 2 candles in the center of the table. They came down at 7, all 4 of them, Evan and Mara and the boys, and they stopped in the doorway of the dining room and looked at the table set, the way I had set it, and something shifted in the room. Mara said nothing at first. Then she said, "It smells incredible, Margaret." "It always does," I said. "Sit down." We ate together, all 6 of us at the big table with the good plates and the candles and Harold's birthday dinner, made finally fully without apology and without anyone throwing it away. Tyler had 2 helpings, and Braden asked me how long it took, and I told him, and he said that was too long, and I told him that the best things usually took longer than you thought was worth it. Mara was quiet through most of dinner, not the managed quiet of someone performing restraint, a genuine quiet, the kind that has earned its silence through cost. Toward the end, when the boys had excused themselves, and it was just the 3 of us at the table, she looked at me and she said, "I want to say something, and I want you to know I'm not saying it to change anything. I'm saying it because it's true, and you deserve to hear it." I waited. I came into this house 3 years ago, and I saw a kind woman who opened her door without conditions, she said, and instead of honoring that I treated it like leverage, I told myself stories to make it feel like something other than what it was. And I am sorry, not for getting caught, not because the lawyer didn't work. I am sorry because you are a good woman and you deserved better from me from the beginning. I looked at her for a long moment. "I believe you," I said, and I did. I believed it was real. I also understood that real remorse does not retroactively rewrite what happened. It just opens the door to what comes next. "The door is open between us," I said. "What we build through it is up to you." She nodded. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand quickly, like she didn't want to make a production of it. I respected that. The moving truck came at 8 the next morning, exactly as Evan said it would. I stayed in my room for most of the morning. Not to avoid it, not because I was hiding, but because watching your son carry boxes out of your house is a particular kind of hard, and I had already been through enough hard things to know that you don't have to watch every one of them to survive them. Some you can let happen in the next room while you sit quietly with a cup of coffee and let the sounds tell you what you need to know. Braden knocked on my door at 10:30 and asked if I wanted to help him carry his backpack. He meant, did I want to walk him out? I said yes. We walked down together, and I helped him with his backpack, and he stood by the car, and he said, "Grandma Margaret, can I come visit?" "You can come any Saturday you want." I said, "I'll teach you the pot roast." He grinned. It was Harold's grin, something in the angle of it. Tyler was loading boxes with Evan, and he looked over his shoulder at me when I came out, and he said, "Later, Grandma." And it was so easy and so natural, so entirely without the weight of the last 3 years, that I almost laughed. "Later," I said. Mara walked past me carrying a lamp, and she paused, and she looked at me, and she said simply, "Thank you for dinner last night." That was all, but she meant it as something larger. I heard the larger thing. "Any time," I said, and I meant the literal and the larger both. Evan was last. He walked back from the truck, and he stopped in front of me on the front path of the house where he had grown up, and he looked at the house the way you look at things when you're putting them into memory deliberately. "I called Harold's old friend Jean," he said, "the one who used to come for poker nights. He told me something Harold used to say." "What did he say?" I asked. "He said Harold used to say the reason he trusted you with everything was because you never once spent anything of his on yourself without giving twice as much back." Evan's voice was steady, but only just. Jean said he told the whole table that every poker night just to remind himself what a good marriage felt like. I looked at my son, and I thought of the man who had left a shoebox in a closet and written careful instructions in black marker on the lid, who had known things and held them quietly, and built what he built so that I would have something solid to stand on when the time came. "He was right," I said. "We were good together." Evan hugged me at the car door. Then he got in and he drove away. I stood on the front path and I watched the truck until I couldn't see it anymore. Then I turned and I walked back into my house, through my front door, past the coat hooks Harold had installed in 1989, through the hall where I had set out the good plates and the candles, into the kitchen where the pot was soaking, and the morning light was coming through the window the way it had been coming through that window for 41 years. I stood in the center of my kitchen and I breathed it in, the quiet of it, the fullness of it, the particular way a home feels when it is yours, and you know it is yours, and you have earned the knowing of it all the way down to your bones. I went to the back door. I opened it. I stepped out into Harold's garden, and I put my hands in the soil the way I did every morning, and I stayed there until my knees told me it was time to stand up. Then I stood up, and I went inside, and I made myself breakfast at the big table, the whole table, all 6 seats, and I sat at the head of it where I had always belonged, and I ate every single bite. My name is Margaret. This house is mine, and I am finally fully, completely home.